Hey guys, welcome to the What's That podcast. I'm your host, Renee Leatherman.
And I'm Jerian Friedman. We're going to have biblical conversations. We're going to talk about the hard things, the funny things, and the things that make you say, What's that?
And today I'm going to share my testimony with you guys. So, to start off, about probably around 6 years ago, I gave my life to the Lord, but I'm going to start even before that to kind of get into where I was before I gave my life. I grew up, in a good home and all that. And through high school, I kind of started using drugs and hanging out with the wrong crowd. I knew who God was because of my dad, but I really had no faith to stand on.
Did you go to church?
I was a CEO, so
Christmas and Easter only.
Yeah, Christmas and Easter only Christian. And so I went and I knew kind of the gospel, but didn't really have that personal relationship. But I had no conviction in my heart. Like I hadn't understood that portion, I think, of it. Anyways, so I went on this journey, through high school, really like finding myself and all that. And I moved out at a young age. I was like 16 years old when I moved out of my house. And I moved into this trap house. It was 8 people living in a 2-bedroom house, and there was drug dealing going on and all this craziness. And I barely made it to graduation. I walked across the stage like high out of my mind, and I left there in a place of, where do I start my life? Mm-hmm. And I really didn't know. So, after high school, I took a year off before I went to college or anything. And I just moved into my own apartment complex, and I lived with one of my best friends. I started going to these different colleges to experience what college was. And that's when like partying really went downhill quickly. And living in that own apartment complex, I had that freedom of making my own choices, but I wasn't making the right ones. And I started doing like a lot of cocaine and drinking, all that. And I actually met the father of my children at that apartment complex. And so at 19 years old, 20 years old, I end up pregnant, knowing this guy for 5 months. And I found out he was cheating on me shortly after I found out I was pregnant. So, yeah, I had to go through that whole process of, do I keep this baby or do I not? And knowing that I probably was not going to spend my life with this person. I'm already seeing patterns that are scary. He's already hurt me. But something in me told me this baby had value.
Right.
And even if it doesn't work out, that God is going to provide for me. And so I chose to keep the baby. And I actually went to CareNet, and they kind of like helped me through that process, that this was a life that mattered and give me that perspective of it. So anyways, I had my first son, and then I was still in this relationship with their father, but it had escalated to the point where it was now domestic violence, and it was weekly I would find out he was cheating. And then it would become abusive because he would get angry that I found out. And when I tried to leave, it would become controlling. And then the abuse would happen. And I just didn't know how to get out of the cycle.
Right.
And so 5 months after having my first son, I found out I was pregnant again. And again, I'm in the same position where I'm just thinking I would be crazy to have a baby with this guy again. Now at this point, I'm under control. Yeah, I don't think I had a phone. That's how controlled I was. I wasn't allowed to have social media. He had taken over all my social media, my emails, contact with my parents, my friends. So I was isolated. And I just didn't really know what the right thing was to do. But I remember calling my parents and telling them, and they were just like completely shocked. And there's not much you can do, right? And I had a lot of outside influences that were encouraging me to get an abortion. Again, sitting there saying, do you see where this is going? And I knew that it wasn't going anywhere good. But again, I prayed and I asked God, I'm like, God, I need a clear sign because I don't know what to do right now. And again, it was pretty clear to me that this life matters. As much as I was scared and I was still a child in a lot of ways, I just made the choice that I was going to have this baby. So I have my second son, and at this point, their father had left to go to Colorado, and he was having an affair up there. And I had the baby alone in Florida, and I left about a week after my second son was born to go up there. And about 2 months into living there, I found out again he had been having an affair. And the abuse at this point was really unthinkable. The cops had been called by the neighbors. He had broken a windshield to my car with a bat in front of the kids. And so at that point, they put a restraining order. It's like a state, I don't know, mandated restraining order or something. Or protection order. I think that's what it's called.
Yeah.
So I wasn't allowed to see him.
Yeah.
And
no contact order.
my kids probably would have been taken if I did. So I just prayed, and I was like, God, I really don't know what to do anymore. And luckily my sister was in the state, and so I could stay with her. But I just had to make a choice at that time. Am I going to continue to go down this road, or am I going to leave? Because if I'm going to leave, now's the time. Like, now's the time I can go. And I remember just feeling like a release, and the Lord just giving me that strength that I was praying for to get up and go. And so I called my mom, the first time I had talked to her in a long time. And I think the last time I had called her, I was trying to leave too, but I ended up canceling my flight because I was back in the relationship. So this time she's like, if you're serious, I will buy you a flight tonight. I ended up getting one, and I was at the house with him still. I wasn't supposed to be. And I got up in the morning after he left for work because I knew I couldn't do it when he was home. I had to act like everything was okay. And I packed what I could in a backpack and got my kids, and my sister drove me to the airport, and I didn't look back. I got on the plane. I sat next to this lady, and it was such a God moment, like one of those God winks, where she shares her testimony with me. She doesn't know me. She has no idea what I've gone through the past 6 months, you know? But she shares her testimony with me. She was in an abusive relationship.
Wow.
She left after 20 years of abuse. She said to me, the one thing I wish I would have done is left sooner. Because when I left, I actually got to know God. I went into a church, and I met my husband within a few years, and we've been happily married for over 30 years now.
Wow.
So she's like, I don't know what you're going through, but I just felt like I needed to share this with you. At this point, I'm like crying in my seat. There's no way to explain that except for God saying, I'm going to work it out. And I knew in that moment, I'm going to have a husband one day, and the Lord's going to bring him to me, and it's going to be at a church. That was what I held on to. God's got this. I don't know what that looks like, but I'm going to just trust that he's going to fulfill this. So I went home, and I started my life over, you know. I really just started from scratch. I moved back in with my mom, which was, it was just so what's the word?
Humiliating.
Humiliating. I wanted to say humilifying. Humiliating. And, but through that, I was able to get the care I needed.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, I was still that 19-year-old girl that was pregnant.
Yeah.
I felt like my life had paused at that point, and I never really had time to grow up. So moving back in with my mom gave me that freedom to start to heal. But I had no idea what healing looked like. And I wasn't doing it with God, if I'm being honest. I was
going to ask that. Like, did you begin to pursue God when you came home, or?
No. So I think when I got home, I was in such a destructive mindset still. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. Like, I remember that still today, that feeling of walking past the mirror, and I would just cry because I didn't even recognize the person I was anymore. I was so, what's the word? Like, disconnected from my actual person. Like,
so I disassociated.
Yeah, I had disassociated for so long because the abuse was so bad. I just had to go somewhere else in my mind. So to come back to reality was really hard, to face all the things that I had and all the lies that had been spoken to me. And I was self-medicating by going out and drinking excessively and doing drugs. And I was just so depressed. I remember waking up in the morning and like looking around for my kids because I didn't even know where they were. Like I was like, did they get out of the crib? Like, I don't know. It's 12 o'clock in the afternoon. I was just so out of it. I couldn't even be present.
Yeah.
And I had an old friend named Juan that reached out to me a few times and was inviting me out to church and inviting me to these events and things. And I'm like, I don't want to really go. But he had invited me out to this worship night. I'm like, I already said no like 4 times now to different events. So I was like, you know what? I'll just go out to this worship thing. We'll see how it is. And then I was like, I'll go to the bar across the road afterwards because it was on like a Friday or Saturday night. And so he invited me out. I go, I show up, and I almost didn't even get there. Like there was roadblocks to me even getting there. I went in the wrong entrance, and the security guard locked me in, like locked the gate behind me. And luckily, I had called Juan right then. The security guard was coming to the gate where they were, and he's like, hey, my friend just got locked in the gate right down the road. Can you unlock it? He's like, you're lucky because I was about to go home. So it just happened to be that he was there to get me out of where I was locked into.
Wow.
But I get to this worship night and I'm just sitting there and it was okay, It started off fine. And then I remember there was a specific song called So Will I that came on. And the song just started speaking about how God created all the stars in the sky. And the sun rises each morning. And we're the only creation that can choose to obey or disobey. And so if the stars were made to worship, so will I. And I just sat down and I just started weeping. And I just felt the presence of the Lord so heavily in that moment. And I had come to a place of such emptiness that I didn't even know how to feel emotion anymore. And a girl named Olga came over and she started praying for me. And she started prophesying. And she started saying, I pray every chain of the enemy break in Jesus' name. And I'm telling you, in that moment, I felt chains fall off my body. It was like this weight, this heaviness on top of my back just crumbled. And I felt the Spirit of the Lord just fill me in that moment. And she started saying, tomorrow you're going to wake up. You're not going to turn back. You're not going to turn back to the drugs. You're going to be a new creation in Christ Jesus. She was just speaking life over me. And I left that night knowing God was real.
Yeah.
There was not a question in my mind. There was no doubt. And I knew that the next day I would have a choice to make. That night, I didn't go out and drink because I was so wrecked by the presence of the Lord. I went to bed and I woke up and I knew that morning, it was so clear to me that the Spirit of God was speaking. And it was like, either you choose to continue your path or you walk on mine. And I was like, God, I don't know what that looks like. I don't really know what surrender looks like. I don't know what being sober looks like. But I'm going to do it. I'm going to try it. And so, it was a complete 180. I turned the other direction. I went through my closet. I threw away, clothes that I knew were not pleasing to the Lord. I got a call that night for someone that I was going to their house. And I told him, I was like, we're done. I'm not coming over to your house again. I'm not doing that anymore. Like, I'm saved, essentially. Like, I'm not playing that game. Yeah. I had Valentine's Day plans with another guy. And I said, nope, not going to dinner with you. Not interested. I had friends reach out that I was partying with weekly. I was going out 5-6 days a week. And I was like, nope, not drinking, not smoking cigarettes, not doing coke. And it was a complete shock to the system.
Yeah.
But something that I heard over and over and over, like this ripple effect, was that testimony of my life changing so radically testified to so many people around me.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't deny that something had changed.
Right.
I was different the night before. The only factor in between then to the new creation was him. That's the only thing.
Yeah. That's
so
good. Wow.
Yeah.
So good. So powerful. I'm over here about to cry.
Oh.
Because that's so good.
But thanks so much for listening today to our podcast, and we'll check in next week.